Hello, everyone. Got a few dirty jokes for you today.
So Michael Murphy goes into the confessional box after years of being away from the church. Sighing, thinking about his many sins, he gets into the church. Spotting there is no line at the confessional, he pulls aside the curtain, enters, and sits himself down. Shocked, he realizes here's a fully equipped bar with crystal glasses, the best vestry wine, Guinness on tap, cigars, and liquor chocolates nearby. On the wall, a fine photographic display of various women who appear to have misplaced their garments. He hears a priest come in. "Father, forgive me," says Murphy. "I think it's been a while since I've been to confession, and to be sure I must say that this place is much better than it used to be." The priest freezes and stares at him. "Get out, you idiot. You're on my side." So a priest dies and goes to heaven. Some time after he's arrived, he's noticed that one of the other people in heaven, a New York City cab driver, was being treated with much more respect than he was. So he went to the Lord and asked, "Lord, why is that man being treated much better than me when all he did for a living was drive a taxi cab, when I dedicated my life to teaching others about you?" The Lord asked, "When people came to your church, were they always alert and paying close attention to you?" "No," the priest admitted. "In fact, they would even fall asleep sometimes during my sermons." "Well, that man was a cab driver in New York City," said the Lord. "And not only were the people he drove very wide awake, but they were usually praying." So one evening, a priest, a rabbi, and a minister find themselves at a bar, enjoying a night out after a long day of work. They order drinks and start chatting about their jobs, sharing stories of the ups and downs of their respective professions. As the night wears on, the conversation turns to a topic that they all have in common: the collection plates that pass through their congregations every week. The priest takes a sip of his beer and says, "You know, I've always tried to be fair with the donations we receive. That's why I draw a chalk circle on the floor and toss all the money in the air. What falls inside the circle goes to the Lord, and what lands outside I keep for the church." The minister nods, impressed. "That's a clever approach. We do something similar at our church, but we reverse it. We draw a circle on the floor, and whatever lands inside the circle, I keep. The rest goes to the Lord. It's only fair, don't you think?" The rabbi has been listening quietly to this point, but now he chimes in. "You guys are making this too complicated," he says with a chuckle. "I don't bother with chalk circles or anything like that. I just toss the money up in the air and let the Lord take whatever he wants." So a young nun went to inform the Mother Superior that she was pregnant. Mother Superior was furious. She said, "How did this happen?" The nun nervously explained, "Well, you see, Mother Superior, it was Father O'Malley from the Catholic Church up the road. He showed me this thing under his cassock that looked like a baby's arm holding a plum and said it was St. Peter. Then he lifted my habit and pointed at my lady parts, which he claimed looked like a rooster's chin, and said it was the gates of heaven. He said St. Peter needed to come into the gates of heaven to make me a good Christian, and I, being a naive and trusting nun, believed him." Mother Superior's face was now a shade of purple, not found in any stained glass window. "That bastard!" she yelled. "He told me it was the Archangel Gabriel's horn, and I've been blowing it every Sunday for 20 years. So one Sunday morning, everyone in one bright, beautiful, tiny town got up early and went to the local church. Before the services started, the townspeople were sitting in their pews and talking about their lives, their families, etc. Suddenly, Satan appeared at the front of the church. Everyone started screaming and running for the front entrance, trampling each other in a frantic effort to get away from evil incarnate. Soon, everyone was evacuated from the church, except for one elderly gentleman who sat calmly in his pew, not moving, seemingly oblivious to the fact that God's ultimate enemy was in his presence. Now this confused Satan a bit, so he walked up to the man and said, "Don't you know who I am?" The man replied, "Yep, sure do." Satan asked, "Aren't you afraid of me?" "Nope, sure ain't," said the man. Satan was a little perturbed at this and queried, "Why aren't you afraid of me?" The man calmly replied, "Been married to your sister for over 48 years. So one day, two young brothers, aged 12 and 14, came home with a $20 and $50 note. Their mother asked them where they got all that money from. "Well, we were standing outside the brothel when a guy left," said the 12-year-old. "We told him that we knew where he had been, so he asked us not to reveal anything and gave us $20. Then we followed the man," said the other boy. "And when he came to his house, we told him that now we also knew where he lived. Then he gave us another $50 and begged us to keep quiet." "That's a truly awful behavior," the mother replied. "You really should be ashamed of yourselves and feel sorry for the man. Off you go to confession in the church." The boys did what they were told and went to the church to confess and atone before the priest. After a while, they came back with $100 because now they also knew where the man worked. So, I live in Chicago. When I heard Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson were guest preachers at a nearby church, I decided to go there and check them out in person. As soon as I sat down, Reverend Sharpton came over to me. I don't know why. Maybe it was because I was the only white person in the church. He laid his hands on my shoulder and said, "By the will of Jesus, the Lord Almighty, and the will of God, you will walk today." I told him I was not paralyzed. Then Jesse Jackson came by and said, "By the grace of God and his Son Jesus, the Lord Almighty, you will walk today." Again, I said that there is nothing wrong with me. After the sermon, I stepped outside, and lo and behold, they were right. My car was gone. So it was Friday afternoon, and the priest called his 3 most devout nuns to his office. "Now, ladies, you have all been tremendous over the last few years, and I've decided to give you all the weekend off," the priest says. "Oh, why thank you," they all respond. Monday comes, and the priest again calls the nuns into his office to see what they got up to on the weekend. "Well," says the first, "I went to a party and consumed alcohol. Please forgive me, Father." Shaking his head, the priest said, "All is forgiven. Go bathe in the holy water." "I, too, consumed alcohol," the second one says. "But I consumed too much and made love to a man." Disappointedly, the priest says, "All is forgiven. Go bathe in the holy water." While all this is going on, the third nun is in absolute hysterics, rolling on the floor in tears of laughter. "What are you laughing at?" the priest asks, bemused. "Well, I consumed some alcohol too, but I didn't make love to man or anything like that." "Well, what did you do?" asked the priest. The nun responded, "I pissed in the holy water." So the minister of a small congregation was about to start his sermon when he noticed a young woman in the front row wearing a tight dress with her breasts almost hanging out. He couldn't concentrate on his message to the flock, so he dismissed the service and asked to speak to the woman after everyone else left the church. When they were alone, the Reverend said in his sternest lecturing voice, "Just what do you mean coming to church dressed like that?" "Why, Reverend," the young woman replied, "all of my boyfriends tell me that they can hear the angels sing when they put their heads on my breasts." "Well, let me check," said the Reverend, placing his head between her breasts. After several minutes, he raised his head and said, "I don't hear any angels singing." "Of course not, Reverend," she said. "You're not plugged in yet." So the local church is doing a riverside baptism. There is a pretty long line of people waiting to be baptized by the river. A wandering drunk man sees the line, doesn't know what's going on, but decides to join in. When it's the drunk man's turn, he goes into the river, and the preacher grabs him, holds his nose, takes him under the water, brings him back up, and says to the drunk man, "Have you found Jesus?" Drunk man says, "No." The preacher gets a puzzled look on his face, grabs the drunk man, and takes him under again, holding him down for a few more seconds. He brings him back up and says, a little more forcefully, "Have you found Jesus?" Drunk man says, "Nope." The preacher is really flustered now, grabs the drunk, and really pulls him under the water, keeping him under for a long time. Finally, he pulls him up and screams at the drunk, "Have you found Jesus?" The drunk man, spitting and sputtering, gasping for air, and when he gets his breath, replies to the preacher, "Are you sure this is where he fell in?" So after many years of not going to church, an elderly lady decides to go to her local service. Although very poor and with worn-out clothing, she dressed in her best and headed out. As she approached the church, she saw all the people dressed in such splendor. Not a stain, not a rip or tear on any of their clothes. The preacher and deacons stood and welcomed people as they entered. She began to walk up the stairs when one of the men stopped her and explained that they had a dress code. He explained that clothes must be pristine and sharp to show respect to the Lord, and turned her away. Dejected and embarrassed, she left and sat on a nearby bench, crying and composing herself, wondering why a Church of God wouldn't accept her. As she sat, God sat down next to her. He puts a comforting hand on her shoulder and says, "Don't worry, they won't let me in either." So one day, an old man wrote a letter to God and tied the letter to a tree outside a church. The priest came and took down the letter. It read, "Please God, I'm a poor man. Please send me $100,000 so I can pay my debts and live peacefully." Being a kind priest, he took donations around town for the old man and raised $5,000. He put it in an envelope and wrote on it from God and left it next to the tree when he saw the old man come visit again. The next day, the old man came back and tied another letter to the tree. The priest then came and took down the letter and read it excitedly. "Dear God, thank you for sending me the money. Next time, please send it to me directly, as the priest can't be trusted. Can you believe he took $95,000 of the money?" So one rainy Sunday afternoon, a young couple were on their way to their church to get married. On the way there, their car lost control and slammed into a telephone pole, sending them both to heaven instantly. The couple soon found themselves standing in front of St. Peter at the pearly gates, welcoming them to heaven. The young woman asks Peter if they could get married in heaven, since their time on earth was cut short. He replies that he'll get back with them on that request. A month later, St. Peter finds them and announces that they can, in fact, get married in heaven. To his surprise, the woman asks, just wondering if things don't work out, will we be able to get a divorce? With a stern look in his eye, Peter blurts out, "Look, lady, it took me a month to find a preacher up here. Do you really think I'm gonna find a lawyer?" So 3 sons left home, went out on their own, and prospered. They discussed the gifts they were able to give their elderly mother. The first said, "I built a big house for our mother." The second said, "I sent her a Mercedes with a driver." The third said, "You remember how our mother enjoys reading the Bible. Now she can't see very well, so I sent her a remarkable parrot that recites the entire Bible." It took elders in the church 12 years to teach him. Mama just has to name the chapter and verse, and the parrot recites it. Soon thereafter, their mother sent out her letters of thanks. "William," she said, "the house you built is so huge. I live only in one room, but I have to clean the whole house." "Arnold," she said, "I'm too old to travel. I stay at home most of the time, so I rarely use the Mercedes. And that driver is so rude. He's a pain." "David," she said, "you were the only one who sent me a good gift. That chicken was delicious." So a small-town preacher was proud of his ability to improvise a sermon on any topic, even if he knew nothing about it. He never prepared, just improvised on whatever came to his mind Sunday morning. So one Sunday morning, he woke up and told his wife, "I'm going to base my sermon today on horseback riding." "But you don't know anything about horseback riding," she said. "I don't want to watch you embarrass yourself. I'm staying home." "All right," he said, and drove to church. On the way there, he began to have second thoughts. He really didn't know anything about horseback riding. Finally, he decided to preach a sermon on love and intimacy in marriage. It went very well, so well, that when one of his congregants saw his wife at the grocery store the next day, she said, "You missed a great sermon yesterday. Your husband was on fire." "That was the best sermon I've ever heard." His wife said, "Really?" "He literally knows nothing about it. In all his life, he's done it just twice. Once before we were married, once after, and both times he fell right off." So the visiting church school supervisor asks little Johnny during Bible class, who broke down the walls of Jericho. Little Johnny replies that he does not know, but it definitely is not him. The supervisor, taken aback by this lack of basic Bible knowledge, goes to the school principal and relates the whole incident. The principal replies that he knows little Johnny as well as his whole family very well and can vouch for them. If little Johnny said that he did not do it, he as principal is satisfied that it is the truth. Even more appalled, the inspector goes to the regional head of education and relates the whole story. After listening, he replies, "I cannot see why you are making such a big issue out of this. We will get 3 quotations and fix the darn wall." So, the Presbyterian Church called a meeting to decide what to do about their squirrel infestation. After much prayer and consideration, they concluded that the squirrels were predestined to be there, and they should not interfere with God's divine will. At the Baptist church, the squirrels had taken an interest in the baptistry. The deacons met and decided to put a water slide on the baptistry and let the squirrels drown themselves. The squirrels liked the slide and, unfortunately, knew instinctively how to swim, so twice as many squirrels showed up the following week. The Lutheran Church decided that they were not in a position to harm any of God's creatures. So, they humanely trapped their squirrels and set them free near the Baptist church. 2 weeks later, the squirrels were back when the Baptists took down the water slide. The Episcopalians tried a much more unique path by setting out pans of whiskey around their church in an effort to kill the squirrels with alcohol poisoning. They sadly learned how much damage a band of drunk squirrels can do. But the Catholic Church came up with a more creative strategy. They baptized all the squirrels and made them members of the church. Now they only see them at Christmas and Easter. Not much was heard from the Jewish synagogue. They took the first squirrel and circumcised him. They haven't seen a squirrel since. So one Sunday, a pastor told the congregation that the church needed some extra money and asked the people to prayerfully consider giving a little extra in the offering plate. He said that whoever gave the most would be able to pick out 3 hymns. After the offering plates were passed, the pastor glanced down and noticed that someone had placed a $1,000 bill in offering. He was so excited that he immediately shared his joy with his congregation and said he'd like to personally thank the person who placed the money in the plate. A very quiet, elderly and saintly lady all the way in the back shyly raised her hand. The pastor asked her to come to the front. Slowly, she made her way to the pastor. He told her how wonderful it was that she gave so much, and in thanks, asked her to pick out 3 hymns. Her eyes brightened as she looked over the congregation, pointed to the 3 handsomest men in the building and said, "I'll take him and him and him." So it was Sunday, and the preacher has just finished an inspiring church service when Rick, the wealthiest man in town, stood up and asked to address the congregation. The preacher wasn't surprised at this. "Just make it quick, Rick." He sighs. "Sure, Father," said Rick. He cleared his throat and addressed the audience. "I can still recall the day when I earned my first dollar," he began. "That same evening, I attended a church meeting where the speaker talked about his humanitarian efforts. At that moment, I had only that single dollar to my name, and I had to make a tough decision. Give it to the speaker's cause or keep it for myself. I chose to donate it all, and I truly believe that God blessed that decision, which is why I am a millionaire today." He finished, a tear gleaming in his eye. "Oh, yeah." An old woman in the audience shouted, "I dare you to do it again." So one day, Mrs. Jones went to have a talk with the minister at the local church. "Reverend," she said, "I have a problem. My husband keeps falling asleep during your sermons. It's very embarrassing. What should I do?" "I have an idea," said the minister. "Take this hat pin with you. I will be able to tell when Mr. Jones is sleeping, and I will motion to you at specific times. When I motion, you give him a good poke in the leg." In church the following Sunday, Mr. Jones dozed off. Noticing this, the preacher put his plan to work. "And who made the ultimate sacrifice for you?" he said, nodding to Mrs. Jones. "Jesus," Jones cried as his wife jabbed him in the leg with the hatpin. "Yes, you are right, Mr. Jones," said the minister. Soon, Mr. Jones nodded off again. Again, the minister noticed. "Who is your redeemer?" he asked the congregation, motioning towards Mrs. Jones. "God," Mr. Jones cried out as he was stuck again with the hatpin. "Right again," said the minister, smiling. Before long, Mr. Jones nodded off again. However, this time the minister did not notice. As he picked up the tempo of his sermon, he made a few motions that Mrs. Jones mistook as signals to jab her husband with the hatpin again. the minister asked. And what did Eve say to Adam after she bore him his 99th son? Mrs. Jones poked her husband, who yelled, "You stick that goddamn thing in me one more time, and I'll break it in half and shove it up your ass." So John is the vicar of a Protestant parish in western Newfoundland, and Patrick is the priest at the Roman Catholic Church across the road. One day, they are seen together erecting a sign that reads, "The end is near. Turn yourself around now, before it is too late." As a car speeds past them, the driver leans out his window and yells, "Leave people alone, you religious nutters. We don't need your lectures." From around the next curve, they hear screeching tires and a big splash. Shaking his head, Father Patrick says, "That's the third one this morning." "Yeah," John agrees, then adds, "Do you think maybe the sign should just say bridge closed?" So, an Irish priest is driving home from a night at his favorite bar. A police officer notices a car swerving all over the road and proceeds to pursue. The Irishman pulls over and the cop makes his way to the driver. Checking the vehicle and noticing bottles all over the floorboard, the policeman asks, "Have you been drinking?" "I don't know what you're on about, officer. I had just only left church after giving praise to the Lord for his many blessings and miracles," said the priest. The policeman frowned. "Well then, what's in the bottles?" "Water," the priest replied. The policeman reached in and grabbing a bottle, opened the top and was quickly overcome with the smell. "This is wine." The priest then promptly shouted, "Praise the Lord. He's done it again." So a priest and a rabbi were sitting next to each other on an airplane. After a while, the priest turned to the rabbi and asked, "Is it still a requirement of your faith that you not eat pork?" The rabbi responded, "Yes, that is still one of our beliefs." The priest then asked, "Have you ever eaten pork?" To which the rabbi replied, "Yes, on one occasion I did succumb to temptation and tasted a ham sandwich." The priest nodded in understanding and went on with his reading. A while later, the rabbi spoke up and asked the priest, "Is it still a requirement of your church that you remain celibate?" The priest replied, "Yes, that is still very much a part of our faith." The rabbi then asked him, "Have you ever fallen to the temptations of the flesh?" The priest replied, "Yes, Rabbi. On one occasion I was weak and broke my faith and made love to a woman." The rabbi nodded understandingly and remained silent, thinking about 5 minutes. Finally, the rabbi leaned over and said, "Beats a ham sandwich, doesn't it?" So a delightful, angelic little boy was waiting for his mom outside the ladies' room of the gas station. A man approached him and asked, "Sonny, can you tell me where the post office is?" The little boy cheerily replied, "Sure, mister. Just go down this street 2 blocks and turn left. It's on the right. You can't miss it." The man thanked the boy kindly, complimented him on how bright he was, and said, "I'm the new pastor in town. If you and your mommy come to church on Sunday, I'll show you how to get to heaven." The little boy replied with a chuckle, "You're kidding me, right? You can't even find the post office." So a man walks into a church confessional and says, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. Last night, I was with 7 different women." The priest pauses for a moment, then says, "Here's what you need to do. Go home, take 7 lemons, cut them in half, squeeze the juice into a glass, and drink it all in one gulp." The man looks puzzled. "And that will absolve me of my sins?" The priest shakes his head. "No, but it'll wipe that damn grin off your face." So an old Jewish man walks into a church and goes to the confessional. He enters and says, "Father, I must confess. Yesterday, I was in my tailor shop, and in the middle of the morning in walked a beautiful woman, maybe 22 years old. She locked the door and started kissing me. I kissed her back, and over the next hour we made love in ways that I had heard of but never thought to try. Then she said thank you, got dressed, and left. I don't even know her name." The priest is taken aback, and after a minute of silence, he asks, "Sir, I believe you to be Jewish. Why are you in the Catholic Church telling me of your sin?" "Telling you? Father, I'm telling everybody." So Paddy goes to his friend Mike and says, "I'm screwing with Jack's wife. Can you hold him in church for an hour after Mass for me?" Mike doesn't like it, but being a friend, he agrees. After Mass, he starts talking to Jack, asking him all sorts of stupid questions just to keep him occupied. Finally, Jack gets annoyed and asks Mike what he's really up to. Mike, feeling guilty, finally confesses to Jack, "Paddy is sleeping with your wife right now, so he asked me to keep you occupied." Jack smiles, puts a brotherly hand on Mike's shoulder and says, "You better hurry home now. My wife died a year ago." So after church, Johnny tells his parents he has to go and talk to the minister right away. They agree, and the pastor greets the family. Johnny tells the pastor, "I heard you say today that our bodies came from the dust." "That's right, Johnny, I did say that. And I heard you say that when we die, our bodies go back to dust." "Yes, I'm glad you are listening. Why do you ask?" "Well, you better come over to our house right away and look under my bed, because there's someone either coming or going." So a preacher, wanting to raise money for his church, was told there was a fortune in horse racing. He decided to purchase a horse and enter it in the races. However, at the local auction, the going price for horses was so high that he settled on a donkey instead. The preacher figured, since he bought the animal, he might as well race it. To his great surprise, the donkey did quite well and came in third place. The next day, the racing sheets carried this headline, "Preacher shows ass." The preacher was so pleased with the donkey that he entered it in the races again. The paper said, "Preacher's ass out in front." The bishop was so upset with this kind of publicity that he ordered the preacher not to enter the donkey in any more races. The newspaper printed this headline, "Bishop scratches preacher's ass." This was too much for the bishop, and he ordered the preacher to get rid of the donkey. The preacher decided to give the animal to a nun in a local convent. The next day, the headlines read, "Nun has best ass in town." The bishop fainted. When he came around, he informed the nun that she would have to dispose of the donkey. The nun searched and finally found a farmer willing to buy the animal for $10. The paper stated, "Nun peddles ass for $10. They buried the bishop the next day. So the other day, I went to a local Christian bookstore and saw a "Honk If You Love Jesus" bumper sticker. Feeling particularly sassy after a thrilling choir performance followed by a thunderous prayer meeting, I bought the sticker and put it on my bumper. Boy, am I glad I did. What an uplifting experience ensued. I was stopped at a red light at a busy intersection, lost in thought about the Lord and how good He is, and didn't notice that the light had changed. It's a good thing someone else loves Jesus, because if he hadn't honked, I would never have noticed. Apparently, lots of people love Jesus. While I was sitting there, the guy behind me started honking like crazy, and then he leaned out his window and screamed, "For the love of God, go, go. Jesus Christ, go." What an exuberant cheerleader he was for Jesus. Everyone started honking. I just leaned out my window, waving and smiling at all these loving people. I even honked my horn a few times to share in the love. There must have been a man from Florida back there because I heard him yelling something about a sunny beach. I saw another guy waving in a funny way with just his middle finger stuck up in the air. I asked my teenage grandson in the back seat what that meant. He said it was probably a Hawaiian good luck sign or something. Well, I've never met anyone from Hawaii, so I leaned out the window and gave him the good luck sign back. My grandson burst out laughing. He was enjoying this religious experience too. A couple of the people were so caught up in the joy of the moment that they got out of their cars and started walking towards me. I bet they wanted to pray or ask what church I attended. But that's when I noticed the light had changed. So I waved to all my sisters and brothers, grinning, and drove on through the intersection. I noticed I was the only car that got through before the light changed again, and I felt kind of sad that I had to leave them after all the love we had shared. So I slowed the car down, leaned out the window, and gave them all the Hawaiian good luck sign one last time as I drove away. Praise the Lord for such wonderful folks. So an elderly Italian man who lived in the outskirts of Monte Cassino went to the local church for confession. He said, "Father, during World War II, a beautiful woman knocked on my door and asked me to hide her from the enemy. So I hid her in my attic." The priest replied, "That was a wonderful thing you did, my son, and you have no need to confess that." "It's worse than that, Father. She started to repay me with sexual favors." The priest said, "By doing that, you were both in great danger. However, two people together under those circumstances are greatly tempted to act that way. But if you are truly sorry for your actions, you are forgiven." "Thank you, Father. That's a great load off my mind. But I have one more question." "And what is that?" said the priest. The man leaned back and asked, "Should I tell her the war is over?" So two church members were going door to door and knocked on the door of a woman who was not happy to see them. She told them in no uncertain terms that she did not want to hear their message and slammed the door in their faces. To her surprise, however, the door did not close and, in fact, bounced back open. She tried again, really put her back into it, and slammed the door again with the same result. The door bounced back open. Convinced these rude young people were sticking their foot in the door, she reared back to give it a slam that would teach them a lesson when one of them said, "Miss, before you do that again, you need to move your cat." So two Jewish guys are walking when one notices a sign on a Catholic church that says, "Convert to Christianity and we'll give you $100. The one says to the other, "Should we do it?" The other says, "No." "Are you crazy?" The first guy replies, "Hey, $100 is $100. I'm gonna do it." So he walks into the church, and a little while later, he walks back out. The friend says, "Well, did you get the money?" He replies, "Oh, that's all you people think about, isn't it?" So local church put out a call for a new bell ringer, and a man with no arms answered. "How will you ring the bell, my son? You have no arms." The pastor asked. "Take me to the bell padre and I'll show you," the man replied. So they go up the bell tower, and the man proceeded to ring the bell using his head. "Wonderful, my son. You start this Sunday. So Sunday rolls around, and once again the bell was heard throughout the town. As the people congregated to the front of the church, they stopped and saw the armless man lying dead in the middle of the courtyard. The town sheriff walks up, looks at the corpse, and asks the crowd, "Does anyone here know this man?" The pastor looks up and says, "No," but his face sure rings a bell. So a young doctor had moved out to a small community to replace a doctor who was retiring. The older doctor suggested the young one accompany him on his rounds so the community could become used to a new doctor. At the first house, a woman complained, "I've been a little sick to my stomach." The older doctor said, "Well, you've probably been overdoing the fresh fruit. Why don't you cut back on the amount you've been eating and see if that does the trick?" As they left, the younger man said, "You didn't even examine that woman. How'd you come to your diagnosis so quickly?" "I didn't have to. You noticed I dropped my stethoscope on the floor in there. When I bent over to pick it up, I noticed a half-dozen banana peels in the trash. That was what was probably making her sick." The younger doctor said, "Pretty clever. I think I'll try that at the next house." Arriving at the next house, they spent several minutes talking with a younger woman. She complained that she just didn't have the energy she once did. "I'm feeling terribly run down lately. You've probably been doing too much extra work for the church," the younger doctor told her. "Perhaps you should cut back a bit and see if that helps." As they left, the elder doc said, "Your diagnosis is almost certainly correct. But how did you arrive at it?" "Well, just like you did at the last house. I dropped my stethoscope, and when I bent down to retrieve it, I noticed the preacher under the bed. So I was testing children in my Dublin Sunday school class to see if they understood the concept of getting to heaven. I asked them, if I sold my house and my car, had a big garage sale, and gave all my money to the church, would that get me into heaven? No. The children answered, if I cleaned the church every day, mowed the garden, and kept everything tidy, would that get me into heaven? Again, the answer was no. If I gave sweets to all the children and loved my husband, would that get me into heaven? Again, they all answered no. I was just bursting with pride for them. I continued, then how can I get into heaven? A little boy shouted out, you got to be dead. So a Bible study group was discussing the unforeseen possibility of their sudden death. The leader of the discussion said, we will all die someday, and none of us really know when. But if we did, we would all do a better job of preparing ourselves for that inevitable event. Everyone shook their heads in agreement with this comment. Then the leader said to the group, what would you do if you knew you only had 4 weeks of life remaining before your death, and then the great judgment day? A gentleman said, I would go out into my community and minister the gospel to those that have not yet accepted the Lord into their lives. Very good, said the group leader, and all the group members agreed that would be a very good thing to do. One lady spoke up and said enthusiastically, I would dedicate all of my remaining time to serving God, my family, my church, and my fellow man with a greater conviction. That's wonderful, the group leader commented, and all the group members agreed that would be a very good thing to do. But one gentleman in the back finally spoke up loudly and said, I would go to my mother-in-law's house for the 4 weeks. Everyone was puzzled by this answer, and the group leader asked, why your mother-in-law's home? Because that will make it the longest 4 weeks of my life. So a truck driver amused himself by running over lawyers as they walked down the side of the road. Every time he saw a lawyer walking along the road, he would swerve to hit him. There would be a loud thud, and then he would swerve back onto the road. As the truck driver drove along one day, he saw a priest hitchhiking. He pulled over and asked the priest, "Where are you going, Father?" The priest said he was on his way to his church, up the road. "I'll give you a lift." The priest climbed into the passenger seat, and the truck driver continued down the road. Suddenly, the truck driver saw a lawyer walking down the road and instinctively swerved to hit him. At the last minute, he remembered he had a priest in the truck and swerved back onto the road. Even though he knew he missed the lawyer, he still heard a loud thud. Unsure of where the noise came from, he glanced in his mirrors. When he didn't see anything, he turned to the priest and said, "I'm sorry, Father. I almost hit a lawyer." The priest replied, "That's okay. I got him with the door." So there was a child who was a typical 4-year-old girl. Cute, inquisitive, bright as a new penny. When she expressed difficulty in grasping the concept of marriage, her father decided to pull out his wedding photo album, thinking visual images would help. One page after another, he pointed out the bride arriving at the church, the entrance, the wedding ceremony, the recessional, the reception, etc. "Now, do you understand?" he asked. "I think so," she said. "Is that when Mommy came to work for us?" So, a crusty old man walks into the local Catholic church and says to the secretary, "I would like to join this damn church." The astonished woman replies, "I beg your pardon, sir. I must have misunderstood you." "What did you say?" "Listen up, damn it. I said I want to join this damn church." "I'm very sorry, sir, but that kind of language is not tolerated in this church." The secretary leaves her desk and goes into the priest's study to inform him of her situation. The priest agrees that the secretary does not have to listen to that foul language. They both return to her office, and the priest asks the old geezer, "Sir, what seems to be the problem here?" "There is no damn problem," the man says. "I just won $20 million in the damn lottery, and I want to join this damn church to get rid of some of this damn money." "I see," said the priest. "And is this damn woman giving you a hard time?" So Donald walks into his therapy session looking a bit worse for wear. The therapist takes one look at his black eye and goes, "What on earth happened this time?" And Donald, without skipping a beat, goes, "Well, I was in church, minding my own business, when I spotted this young lady in front of me. Her skirt was stuck in her butt. Being the gentleman I am, I decided to help her out and fix it. Next thing I know, bam, she clocks me one right in the eye." So, the therapist starts explaining why it might not have been the best idea. Fast forward a week later, Donald's back, and guess what? The black eye's still fading, but now he's got a matching set. He tells the therapist, "I thought I'd learned my lesson, Doc." But nope. Sat right behind her again, saw the same skirt situation, tried to fix it, and boom, another punch. Now, you'd think he'd wise up, right? But nope, not Donald. Next week rolls around, and he walks in looking like he went 10 rounds with a heavyweight champ. The therapist's like, "Please, please, don't tell me you did it again." And Donald, with his battered face and all, goes, "Nope, not this time. I noticed her skirt was all sorted today, but then I remembered how much she seemed to enjoy it tucked in there, so I thought, why not lend a hand?" So a Jewish guy moves into a Catholic neighborhood. He sees they love to barbecue, so he breaks out his grill. They are all very nice, and he enjoys talking to his neighbors over the fences and sharing grilling tips. But he notices Fridays, he's the only one out. After a few weeks, he asks why. They tell him as Catholics they don't eat meat on Friday, but instead go to church for a fish fry. Oh, that explains it. Time passes. Everyone is getting along great. His neighbors invite him to the fish fry. He is touched and accepts. But there's been a misunderstanding, and while there he comes to see they think he intends to convert. He feels awkward as he had no idea, and they're so nice he doesn't want to offend. The priest takes holy water and sprinkles it on him 3 times, saying, "You were born a Jew. You were raised a Jew, but now you are a Catholic." Just like that, it's over. A few Fridays later, he's not in the mood for the fish fry. His neighbors are shocked to see him with his barbecue out with big beef ribs cooking. They ask what gives. How can he have beef on Friday? He says, "Oh, don't worry. Watch." And he sprinkles water on the ribs, saying, "You were born a cow. You were raised a cow. But now you are a fish." So an old Eastern European man goes to his church to confess a sin from long ago. He sits down in the confessional and begins, "Father Grigori, I am old and fear I may not have much longer left to live. I have been a good Catholic and have confessed all of my sins except this one. Welcome, Vladimir. We are friends from the old country, and I know you well. You can tell me anything," replied Father Grigori. "Well, Father, when I was 13 years old, I lived next door to a nice old man called Mr. Ivanov, and he had a beautiful house with a beautiful garden, and at the front of this beautiful garden, he had a beautiful painted white wooden fence that shone and gleamed in the sunlight and was the envy of everyone in the village." Vladimir paused. "Go on, my child, go on. You are in God's house. There are no secrets here," reassured Father Grigori. Okay, I will continue. As well as a beautiful house, a beautiful garden, and a beautiful white fence, Ivanov also had a beautiful daughter. Her name was Natasha. I loved her. Although but a boy, I decided I must tell Natasha how I felt, as I could bear the weight of my love no more. Vladimir paused as tears filled his old and wrinkled eyes. "Please, Vladimir, continue. I know it is hard, but your sin must be confessed," urged Father Grigori. Vladimir wiped his eyes with an old handkerchief, sniffed, and continued. "Well, one beautiful summer night, I decided to sneak over the beautiful white fence, through the beautiful garden, and up to the window of Ivanov's beautiful house to confess my feelings for the beautiful Natasha. But when I got to her window and looked in, I saw that she was not alone." Again, tears filled his eyes, and he clutched his chest as if his heart was again breaking for the first time as it had all those decades ago. "I know, my child. I know. It still hurts. I can see. But you must be strong and carry on. Your sin must be heard," said Father Grigori. Again, Vladimir wiped his eyes and sniffed. Then he continued. "As I looked through the window, I saw a boy I recognized, and he was in bed with my Natasha. It was a local boy who used to make fun of me at school. His name was Boris. I was so devastated and heartbroken that I could not move. I just stood at the window and watched as Boris and my beautiful Natasha, who to me was as pure and clean as Ivanov's beautiful white painted fence, touched and kissed each other and writhed together in her beautiful white bed for what seemed like hours. This is terrible, Vladimir. said Father Grigory. "I am so sorry to hear you had to suffer so at such a young age. But is this the sin that troubles you so even to this day, that you stood at that window and watched Boris and Natasha that night all those years ago?" asked Father Grigory, confused. "No," replied Vladimir shamefully. "Alas, this is not my sin. My sin is that after Boris and my beautiful Natasha had finished their filthy, depraved, carnal act and were putting on their clothes and laughing, I flew into a fit of rage, and I ran back through Ivanov's beautiful garden and jumped over his beautiful white fence and went to my father's shed. There on the shelf, I saw a single old tin of paint. It was red paint, and next to it, I found my father's old paintbrush. In my anger, I snatched them from the shelf, and I ran to the front of Ivanov's beautiful house, and on his beautiful white painted fence, in huge red letters, I dubbed, "Natasha Ivanov is a filthy slut," at which Vladimir broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Aghast, Father Grigory exclaimed, "That was you. I remember this scandal. Poor Natasha was so ashamed she was sent off to live in a convent in the mountains and was never seen by anyone in the village again. This is indeed a terrible sin, and you were right to come here today to confess it." Still Vladimir wept. "But can I ask, Vladimir, why did you wait all these years to confess it? Why did you not confess it at the time? Was there not a priest in the village?" Vladimir composed himself and lifted his head. "There was a priest, father, yes, but he had gone to the city to visit his dying mother and was away for several weeks, so I was unable to confess this terrible, unforgivable sin at that time." "I see," said Father Grigory, nodding. "Well, as a good Catholic boy, as I know you were, if you were unable to confess this heinous and shameful sin of befouling Ivanov's beautiful white fence with such filth, did you at least repent it?" "Alas, father, I could not," replied Vladimir shamefully. "But why?" asked Father Grigory. "Because, father," replied Vladimir, "I had no white paint."